Hello, my name is Sam Bullington, and I am a writer and public speaker, a counselor and healer, and a gender studies professor at the University of Colorado. I believe that we are living in exciting and historic times. We are witnessing the beginnings of a fundamental shift in human perception of the magnitude of understanding that the Earth is round. We are on the cusp of a major breakthrough as a species, a collective evolutionary leap to a higher level of consciousness. And while this leap itself is positive and exciting, the process of breakdown leading up to the leap is chaotic and highly stressful. Now, species evolve out of necessity when they are compelled to do so by some crisis situation. And our old and destructive ways of being in the world and interacting with one another and the Earth have brought us to just such a stark choice, where we must evolve or perish. And transgender, intersex, genderqueer, and non-binary folks have an important role in this transformation. In part because we are experts at transformation. And in addition, there are things that we perceive and know from where we are positioned in life that other people just can't and don't. And so it is imperative that we come forward to share what we know and see for the benefit of everyone. Does this mean that I am promoting trans superiority or exceptionalism or tribalism? Absolutely not. I am not saying that gender creative people are somehow better people or the only ones who are meant to lead, but merely that there are things that we know and experience due to our particular life journeys that are unique and are necessary for others to hear. We are the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. And so our sensitivity allows us to feel the effects of the toxic situation that we are currently in collectively before others can really perceive the danger. But the toxicity is impacting all of us, not just gender creative people. And in many ways, then gender creative people are standing in the future where we all are headed, and so are already embodying some of the aspects of the new paradigm, which makes us natural teachers and leaders. And so here are just a couple of the things that we know due to our life journeys. First is that binaries don't represent reality. And so in my last video, I spoke some about the dualistic thinking that is one of the core aspects of Western culture, perhaps stemming from the Western need for order and clear and hierarchical classification. And so binaries are created, and let's just take the us-them binary as an example, which is so fundamental to nationalism. And so how it's created is by falsely homogenizing the us and falsely homogenizing the them, and then exaggerating and essentializing the differences between the us and the them. And so the extremes are highlighted, the middle is erased, and then we call it a binary. And this imposition is not only inaccurate, but it actually shapes what we are able to see. So according to sociologists Suzanne Kessler and Wendy McKenna, the reason that we have a gender binary is because we believe that there's a gender binary, which causes us to perceive a gender binary. And so this explains why the 1 in 1,500 babies who are born intersex are subjected to traumatic surgeries to make them conform to the binary, rather than be seen as evidence that our binary construction is perhaps inadequate. So our training to view life in terms of oppositional pairs, as I mentioned last time, has serious implications well beyond gender, as we can see with our current political polarization. And so the very construct of rigid dichotomies encourages antagonism. Linguistics professor Deborah Tannen reports, for instance, that when students are asked to compare two cultures, that they are inclined to polarize them. And so she actually has them compare three instead. And so key to Western culture is the belief that issues have two sides and that truth is best gained through debate. And so this creates an adversarial environment which encourages the demonization of one's opponents, which we're seeing all around us constantly. So it makes us need to make our opponents wrong to prove ourselves right. And so the temptation becomes great then to oversimplify, to ignore facts and nuances that perhaps support our opponent's viewpoints, which actually undermines our pursuit of truth and is actually damaging to the human spirit. And so if we count up all of the folks who blur categories, so trans and genderqueer and intersex and non-binary folks, bisexual folks, bilingual and bicultural folks, mixed race folks, we can clearly see that if we are not already the majority, then we are rapidly approaching it. And we also know that nobody wins at the gender game. So trans and intersex and genderqueer and non-binary folks generally have intimate lived experiences of the suffering that is caused by gender. And not only the suffocating limitation of the gender binary, but firsthand knowledge of the dysfunction on both sides of the binary, the ways that there truly are no winners in the gender game. And so while the damaging effects of toxic masculinity on women and on society are fairly obvious at this point, the current administration is doing a great job of making those more apparent, which makes my job a lot easier. I don't have to convince people of that in the same way anymore. So sexual assault and domestic violence and warfare and school shootings are just some examples. The negative impact on men is just not widely acknowledged. So one of the most surprising aspects of my experience of masculinity since going on hormones has been the degree of loneliness that I feel on a daily basis. So while since going on hormones, everyone now wants to know what I think and attributes tremendous value and authority to my thoughts, almost no one asks me how I feel or how I am. And so I am often left without a sense of others' care for my well-being. And this is especially pronounced with regards to my needs for physical affection. So I'm a very physically affectionate person. It's a big way that I connect with people and helps me to feel grounded. And now, I find that I no longer touch women because in my current packaging, then that feels somewhat creepy to me. I don't touch men because that could result in violence. And women don't tend to touch me, and men don't tend to touch me. And so I tend to move throughout much of my daily life, largely without the experience of touch, which makes me feel rather disconnected and diminishes my own sense of humanity. And as is the case with many men, then most of the physical affection that I receive is in the context of sexuality, which is a totally different experience. And so this emotionally damaging gender training really starts in infancy. In his book, I Don't Want to Talk About It, Overcoming the Secret Legacy of Male Depression, psychologist Terry Real shows how parents often unconsciously begin projecting a kind of innate manliness and thus a diminished need for comfort and protection and affection onto baby boys as young as newborns. As Real explains, little boys and little girls start off equally emotionally expressive, equally dependent, equally desirous of physical affection. If any differences exist, little boys are, in fact, slightly more sensitive and expressive than little girls. However, parents imagined inherent sex-related differences between baby girls and baby boys. And so when a group of 204 adults was shown a video of the same baby crying, but given differing information about the baby's sex, then they judged the, quote, female baby to be scared, while the, quote, male baby was described as angry. And these differences in perception creates correlating differences in the kind of parental caregiving that newborn boys receive. And so a child who is thought to be afraid is held and cuddled a lot more than a child who is thought to be angry. And so Real found that from the moment of birth, that boys are spoken to less than girls, comforted less, and nurtured less at the most vulnerable point in their lives. So there's a lot more that I can say about this, but for the sake of time, let's just fast forward to middle age. And so from 2009 to 2014, while mortality rates fell for most Americans, they actually rose for middle-aged white heterosexual men, with most of the fatalities coming from what experts call despair deaths, including drug overdoses, alcohol-related liver disease, and suicide, all consequences of unhealthy coping mechanisms. So men die early because they do not take care of themselves, because self-care is considered to be feminine. And this mentality is really key to masculine training. Man up, play through the pain, because toxic masculinity teaches men to be afraid of looking weak. And masculinity's death tolls tend to be attributed to their more specific manifestations, things like alcoholism, workaholism, violence, and the kind of risk-taking behaviors that are undertaken to prove or defend one's masculinity, such as drunk driving or driving without a seatbelt. Even when masculinity does not literally kill, it creates a sort of spiritual death, leaving many men feeling traumatized and disconnected and oftentimes unknowingly depressed. And indeed, men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. It is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50, and men comprise 80% of all suicides, in large part due to the pressure and isolation that they feel as men. And finally, then trans and intersex and genderqueer and non-binary people also understand from deep lived experience the ways that change can be exciting and positive, but also terrifying and heartbreaking. So the ways that evolution does require change, i.e. death and loss. And I come from a long line of change haters, and actually waited for 11 years to go on hormones after coming out as trans, because I knew it was going to be disruptive and fundamentally transform every aspect of my relationship to society. And so I am very sympathetic with the very real fears that people are facing right now in watching the collapse of the society that they have known and the uncertainty that they are feeling about what comes next. And I especially have compassion for conservative folks, because that's all that conservatism really is folks who do not want things to change. But change is inevitable. And so we have boarded the roller coaster, and the safety bars are in place, and we have left the station, and there is no going back at this point. And so that is the final thing that I'll mention that trans and intersex and genderqueer and non-binary people well understand, and that is that things are not always as they appear. And so don't be misled by surface appearances. So most people who encounter me in my everyday life, for instance, would never guess that I'm a transsexual. And so looking at the state of the world right now, it may feel like we are going in the exact opposite direction of where we want to end up. But that is really the nature of the paradigm shift, that sometimes the quickest route to our destination can be what appears to be heading in the opposite direction.